Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife was hoping for a husband on a business trip, but he arrived early and upon entering the house saw something he shouldn't have. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. It was Friday morning, a little after 5 o'clock, and I had finished work for the week. Oregon weather in April can be unpredictable, but today was gorgeous, almost 70 degrees, sunny, with not a cloud in the sky. I was in a good mood, the work week was over, and the weather was so beautiful. What would I do this weekend? And that's when my mood turned sour. I had no plans, no dates, nothing to do. I've been divorced for 3 years, I'm 28, and I'm not dating anyone. I tried to find someone online but had no luck, just a waste of money. Most of my friends are married, and the few blind dates they set me up with were disastrous. My ex is in a serious relationship with a woman, and they are probably my closest friends. The thought, what's wrong with me, kept creeping into my head. I drove up to my house and felt briefly better as I looked at the structure. Thanks to my boss, I got a great deal on a house. This was definitely a restoration project, and I spent a lot of time trying to get it in order. I've made progress. The 1950s mid-century style home was a restoration project, and I invested a lot of time and money to bring it to its current condition. My contacts in the timber industry helped. I came home, grabbed my running gear, and went to change. I looked at myself in the mirror, 6 feet tall, pretty beefy at 190 pounds. No abs, but definitely showing abs. According to my ex, I looked pretty good. So what's wrong with me? And why haven't I had a meaningful date in months? I started to get depressed, so I went for my 5-mile run. I always feel better after working out and was enjoying a beer in the evening sun on my back deck when my cell phone rang. It was my ex-brother-in-law, Mike. Hey Cam, what's new? Mike handles the finances and manages what little money I have. He's really good at this. His wife, Megan, is beautiful, fun to talk to, and keeps his huge ego in check. What do you have for tomorrow? Knowing that I had nothing but not wanting to admit it, I hinted that I was busy but had some flexibility in my schedule. Don't tell me the old man makes you work on Saturday. A little background, I work for Specialty Timbers. Mike's father, Ted Robinson, is the owner and my boss. My ex, Kimberly, is an accountant and Mike's sister. Ted's daughter. Mike never went into the forestry business. He got his MBA and now has his own investment business, Robinson and Associates. Growing up, my mom, sister, and I weren't exactly poor, but we were close to that socioeconomic level. In high school, I had to pay for anything beyond basic needs. After football season my junior year, I went to the counseling center and found an opening at a company that was a bike ride away from my mom's house. I knew that if I ever wanted to buy a car, no one would help me pay for it. That Tuesday at 4 p.m., I walked through the front door of Specialty Timbers for the first time. It was an open office with windows overlooking the warehouse workshop at the back and 3 private offices to the left. I checked my note and asked for Mr. Penner. After 10 minutes, an older, short man with long hair falling into his face approached. I'm Skip Handrety, he said, extending a large, rough hand with part of his index finger missing. We walked into one of the offices, which was cluttered with files, magazines, catalogs, and blocks of wood. He sat down at his desk, put his feet on the table, and asked me what I knew about the forestry business. Not very much, I replied. Probably not the best answer if I wanted to get the job. Then why are you wasting my time? He asked. I was nervous and scared and didn't know what to answer. He just looked at me. Finally, I said, Mr. Penner, I need a job, and I promise I will work hard. He continued to stare at me for a good 30 seconds without saying a word. I was thinking about what other jobs were on the board at the counseling center when suddenly he said, be here tomorrow at 3:30 and be ready to work. I was stunned, stood up, shook his hand, and left. I noticed a tall, balding man emerge from the last office and look at me. I didn't yet know how my life would change. So, let's go back to that Friday in April, sitting on my deck and talking to Mike. No, I'm not working this weekend, just a lot of things to do. Oh crap, tomorrow is Saturday, and there's an event at the fair. Megan invited some friends, and I need you to be there with me. I actually wouldn't mind going, but I had to pretend I didn't want to. Before I could start protesting, Mike said, "I'll pick you up at 11 o'clock. And I heard the beep. Apparently, I'm going to the spring fair. I met Mike Robinson the same day I met my future wife. By the end of my junior year, I was working at Specialty 5 days a week from 3:30 to 6 o'clock and sometimes on Saturdays if needed. I bought a very used Corolla with a ton of miles on it, but it ran well and had good fuel economy. I made enough to pay my insurance, buy some gas, and have about $10 a week left over to help my mom. I was excited to start working full-time from 7 to 3:30 every day. As soon as school ended that Tuesday after Memorial Day, I showed up bright and early to start my first full day of work. The shop leader was a wiry man named Don Smith, whom I think could be called my mentor during my work after school. Smitty knew all the machines in the shop, kept track of inventory, and controlled the supply and receipt of materials. He actually ran the operation in the background. He taught me a lot, and that summer, I got to learn more about how veneer saws and other machines worked. My job was mainly servicing machines, and everything I knew I learned from Smitty. That Tuesday, I was informed that I would have a 15-minute break at 10 a.m., a 30-minute lunch break at noon, and then finish at 3:30. Smitty sent me to the break room at 10 a.m., a place I had never been before. It was on the far side of the office next to the women's restroom. When I walked into the break room, the first thing I saw was a cheeky little guy smirking at me, probably because of the way I was dressed. "Hey Smitty, you're causing an energy crisis." I was wearing the old overalls Smitty had given me, and it still had his oval name tag sewn to the breast pocket. It was smeared with oil from my work with the equipment. That wasn't the worst part. Right away, I heard giggling. There was a girl about my age, pretty, giggling behind her hands as she looked at me. I had never seen them before. At Specialty, the owner, a tall man, came into the office and shouted at them to quit it. I quickly made my way to the break room, away from those two smug kids. As I sat there embarrassed, drinking a cup of coffee, the owner, a tall man, entered the lounge. In all the months I worked there, I had never spoken to him. Don't mind them, they're just my spoiled children. They're working here this summer, but to be honest, I'm not sure what Mike is getting paid for. We've never officially met. I'm Ted Robinson. He extended his hand. As we shook hands, I muttered, "Cameron Joseph. Nice to meet you. Cameron, I've been hearing good things about you from Smitty. Let's talk later this summer. For now, ignore those two idiots." That was my first meeting with Mike and Kimberly Robinson. That Saturday morning, I heard the horn of Mike's black BMW, only 20 minutes late. "Where's Meg?" I looked at Mike, who had dark sunglasses, slick-back black hair, and a tan face. He was still the same preppy guy I met 12 years ago. She met Brandy and Celia for coffee downtown, and were meeting them at the fair. Brandy and Celia? I wonder if it was a setup. We parked and walked a few blocks to the fairgrounds. I needed to drop something off at the fair. In the office, Robinson and Associates was one of the sponsors of the event, and Mike was delivering brochures for his company. The girls were standing at the booths. As we approached, I saw a gorgeous blonde and a smiling Megan who kissed Mike and introduced me to Brandy and Celia. Brandy had long, dark, straight hair and was very full but a little harsh. She had a little cleavage, and I had to look up when we shook hands. Celia was different, dark, curly hair, an athletic build, and a joyful smile. She looked into my eyes and said, "Nice to meet you, Cameron. I've heard about you." I stole a glance at Megan and saw only a sly smile. My weekends definitely got better. A group of 5 of us wandered around the fair, and I often walked next to Celia. She had a pleasant way of looking me straight in the eyes when we talked. She had a great laugh, and I discovered that I was outgoing and witty. Every now and then, I would glance at Mike and catch him smiling at me. It was a great day. We spent several hours examining all the exhibits, occasionally visiting friends, and having a good time. Mike knew a lot of people, and it was a networking opportunity for his business. We decided to go to Mallory's to grab some beer and try to find a table outside. Brandy decided to head home, something about a headache, and Mike said we'd make sure Celia got a ride. We found a great outdoor table, and the sun was wonderful. Mike told many funny stories about work, marriage, and his family. I tried to remember the last time I felt this good. Celia was fun to talk to, she was interesting and asked me questions about myself. After Mike ordered round 3, I casually remarked that I had to run the next day. Celia asked where I was running, and before I knew it, we had a race date set for Sunday at 9 a.m. When we finally left, I had a great time with Celia, talking, laughing, and learning about her life. It was very nice. It seemed like we just clicked. I just hoped there wasn't someone else in her life. We dropped her off at her apartment, and I told her I'd pick her up at 9 o'clock for a run along the Offendan Trail. As we headed home, I noticed a look from the front seat. "What?" I said as they grinned. "Okay, she's cool. What do you want from me?" "I'm running with her tomorrow." "Wow, that's fast," Mike grinned. "Ever since Kim and I got divorced, Mike has been trying to find me a new woman. I think he feels somewhat responsible for my failed marriage to his sister. He may have known about her intimacy in advance, but he never mentioned it. I worked at Specialty Timbers all of last year after high school. When football ended in the fall, I even worked on Saturdays. I learned all about cars from the inside out from Smitty. During busy weeks, I was asked to run the machinery on Saturdays. I operated everything except the veneer press and learned the capabilities of all the machines. Kim came over on Saturdays and helped with the books. She went to a private high school on the other side of town, so that was the only time I saw her. She was really cool, fun to be around, and not stuck up like the other rich kids. Somewhere in the middle of our senior year, we started dating. What began as friendship turned into a relationship. We both graduated and worked as specialists that summer. I wasn't sure what I would do in the fall, but Kim was going to Colorado College. I was worried about being apart and missing her. She said, "Don't worry, you're the only man for me." She was being honest, but she just didn't include other women in the equation. Late that summer, my boss, Kim's father Ted Robinson, came to me and asked about my plans for the future. I really didn't know what would happen. I had an application for Lane Community College on my dresser, but even though community college was inexpensive, I didn't have the money for it. It turns out Mr. Henry had cancer. He only came in a few days a week, and that wouldn't last long. "Cameron, you know our store, you get along well with our customers, and I need some youth in this office. I've thought about having you work with Smitty when needed in the shop, but mostly I want you in the office learning the business side of specialty lumber. I'm going to start you at $3,000 a month, and in good times, there will be bonuses at the end of the year." I was shocked. I immediately agreed and couldn't help but wonder if my relationship with his daughter had helped me get the position. On Monday, I started working in the office. I began studying business and was impressed by Ted's knowledge and his calm but confident approach to clients. I knew the products and our processing capabilities well, but what I didn't know was pricing, customer knowledge, and the accounting side of the business. Ted was responsive and patient with me. After the initial nervousness around him, I became much more comfortable. I stayed in touch with Kim while she was in college and felt like our relationship remained strong well into the fall. I picked Celia up Sunday morning at 9 o'clock for a run. She wore maroon tights and a fitted top from Lululemon. She looked amazing, a very beautiful athletic body with black curls, dark eyes, and a gorgeous smile. We chatted quietly as we drove to the trailhead. I usually run a 5-mile loop. "Is that okay with you?" I asked. "That's fine," she replied. We stretched and ran. When you run with someone for the first time, you need to find their rhythm, speeding up or slowing down a little at the beginning, but we didn't have that problem. We immediately found a common pace. We chatted along the way, and I learned that she was a dental hygienist originally from the Bay Area. Her father had died, he worked for the railroad, and her mother worked at a hair salon owned by her mother's sister. Her mother was of Italian descent, and her mother's maiden name was Anna Maria Salti. That's where she got those dark curls from. We talked all the way, and our 5-mile lap was completed by 10:30. It felt so good that I could have run another 5 miles with her. I offered coffee, and we went to the nearest cafe. I learned from Mike and Megan on the way back that she had no known boyfriends or significant others. I made a mental list. 1. No boyfriend. 2. She has fun with me, and I seem to like her. 3. Great appearance. I started to think that my bad luck might be changing. Unfortunately, I knew I still had a lot to do at home. The tile on the fireplace was half finished, and sheets of shower packing were in the garage. Celia, I really enjoy spending time with you, but I have to go. I'd like to see you next week. Are you free? Yeah, I think so. How about something on Saturday? We exchanged phone numbers and went our separate ways. I thought about kissing her or hugging her or something. I felt so close to her, but I decided that I would do it right and not rush. I was pretty happy when I got home and started working. It had been a busy week, and I wondered when it would be appropriate to finally make an appointment for the weekend. I texted her on Monday after work and asked if she wanted to hike Rainbow Falls in the afternoon and have dinner afterward. She responded enthusiastically and added heart emojis. Our first official date was set. Tuesday was a busy day at work at Specialty Timbers. Ted went to Seattle to meet with a large potential client. One problem after another arose, and I had to solve them: a late delivery, an unhappy customer, and one of the custom machines broke down while Smitty was working on the veneer machine. I didn't get home until after 7 o'clock. I was exhausted. While I was defrosting a frozen pizza, my phone rang with a message. What else? I thought. To my complete delight, it was a message from Celia. My mood immediately brightened, and we texted for over an hour. Everything felt so easy and natural, even though it had been less than a week. I was excited about a woman for the first time in a long, long time. On Wednesday evening, I texted her, and we had another pleasant texting session. On Thursday evening, she started writing herself, and we discussed some details of our plans for Saturday. That evening, I called Mike. He was at dinner with Megan and said he would call back. They called back on the way home. Hey, what's up, Romeo? Mike said, with Megan giggling in the background. I just wanted to know how dinner went, I replied, trying to steer the conversation towards Celia without sounding too impatient in front of Megan. Come on, you don't care about our dinner. We know you're going out with Celia this weekend. Your running date must have gone well. I told them the run went well and that she seemed like a nice girl. Have you slept with her yet? Mike asked. Don't be a jerk. Not everyone thinks like you, Megan said, laughing. We talked a little more, joked around, and had fun before it was time to call it a day. Dude, I haven't heard you worry this much about a woman since my sister, Mike said. I explained that I liked her so far. As we were finishing our conversation, I heard Megan say, "Be careful, Cam." I wonder what she meant, I thought. On Friday after work, I had just finished a run and was sitting on the back deck, drinking a beer. What a difference a week makes. Last week at this time, I was feeling depressed. Today, I felt very good. I texted Celia around 8 o'clock, checking a few details about our date tomorrow and just to see what she was up to. I checked my phone at 9:30, and there was no answer, which was a bit unusual. Okay, see you tomorrow, I texted. I picked her up at 1 p.m., and we drove east into the mountains to the trailhead. Something seemed a little off. She was still pleasant and relatively affectionate but lacked her usual energy. When I asked how she was, she said she was just a little tired and that it had been a long week. Before I could learn more about her long week, she started asking about the hike. No more explanations about the long week. We enjoyed the hike, and when the trail was wide enough, we walked side by side, and she held my hand. This little closeness felt so good after all this time without her. The plan was to take her home so she could change and freshen up, then stop by again at 7 o'clock for dinner at Macedo's downtown. She looked stunning in skinny jeans and a tight top. She hugged and kissed me when I arrived. I almost thought that if I insisted, we could quickly end up in her bed, but I remembered that I wanted to do everything right and take my time. The restaurant was cozy, with wonderful food and delicious wines. We shared a bottle of wine, and each of us had a glass of brandy while enjoying dessert. I knew I needed to sober up a bit before heading home, so I suggested we take a walk around the square. This is an area in the city center closed to cars, with cafes, shops, bars, and restaurants. The night was pleasant, and Celia snuggled up to me as we walked. I think we both felt good, a little drunk but happy, with light, casual conversation as we passed couples and groups of people. As we were returning, I noticed a group of young people ahead. As we walked around them, suddenly one of them shouted, "Hey, CC." I was immediately wary, but Celia walked up to them, smiling, and accepted hugs from 3 of them. "Hey girl, what's up? What are you doing here?" one of them asked. Meanwhile, I stood there, ignored, while they all chatted. After maybe a minute, although it seemed much longer, she turned to me, red with embarrassment, and said, "Cameron, these are my friends Bobby, JT, and Marcus." I automatically extended my hand for a handshake. The 3 looked at each other, smiled, and demonstratively tried to shake my hand with various elaborate movements. They chatted for 10 minutes about things I didn't understand. I realized they were talking about music in a club called Evolution. There was an amazing closeness between her and these guys, especially with Marcus, which seemed strange and unsettling to me. I felt all the warmth and goodwill of the evening disappear. From my observations, she seemed to enjoy the attention and company of this group. Finally, with hugs and some light kisses, they parted. "Nice to meet you," I said. Marcus just nodded, and they walked away. After about 15 seconds, I heard them laughing. Celia pressed herself against me again, but my relaxed mood had vanished. Were these her friends? There's nothing wrong with them, but they're clearly not my crowd, I thought. She talked about them a little, and I realized that Evolution was a dance club in the old part of town that used to be an old warehouse. She was telling me how fun it was and that we should go there. I chuckled and said I wasn't a very good dancer. "Nobody cares. It's just a place to have fun," she said. We drove home, and I tried to stay cheerful, but something about that scene made it hard for me to be as affectionate as before. When we got to her place, I walked her to the lobby and hugged her goodbye. "Would you like to come over for coffee?" Normally, this would be a no-brainer, but the combination of wanting to do things right and protecting myself from pain stopped me in my tracks. "Thanks, but I'm fine." "See you later," she said. I gave her a quick hug and kiss on the cheek and left. Throughout Kimberly's first and second years at Colorado College, we saw each other during all her holidays. I looked forward to her visits, and so did she, almost as much as I did. When I asked her about school, she didn't say much. Sometimes I was jealous and asked her about all the boys at school. One day, I might have gotten a little too jealous about it, and she grabbed me by the shirt with the most serious look I've ever seen on her and said, "I told you there are no other guys. Leave it alone." She then left the restaurant. Mostly, we got along well. I envisioned an ideal situation where Kimberly and I would run Specialty Timbers together. It seemed too good to be true, but it felt like it could happen. I learned a lot from Kim's father, Ted. We had a good, comfortable relationship. I think he was also pleased with my relationship with his daughter. He probably saw me as a bit of an opposite to Mike. Mike was bright, confident, and funny, though he barely stayed afloat, partying throughout his college life. I think he and Ted had a serious conversation, and Mike came to his senses and ended up finishing college. I, on the other hand, was not as bright. I made up for it with hard work and knowledge of wood products. Ted knew Mike would never make a career with Specialty Timbers. I looked like a long-term employee and was in a serious relationship with his daughter. Ted was definitely on my side. Here's what happened. I proposed to Kimberly before her junior year, and she said she needed to think about it. Halfway through that year, Kim asked for a little space. I was heartbroken and threw myself into work. We still talked, and our friendship remained strong, but Kim was trying to find herself. We didn't see each other much during her junior year. We emailed and sometimes called each other, and sometimes I saw her when she came home. We worked together all summer, but I gave her the space she asked for. During her senior year, our communication dwindled. I even went on a few dates, nothing serious. Suddenly, she started calling and texting like in the old days, to the point where I thought, I need space. That summer, she came back, and we got back together. She asked if my proposal still stood. I was shocked but happily said yes. We got married that Christmas. I was extremely happy. Ted was extremely happy, and looking back, I think Kimberly was moderately happy. But at that moment, I was blinded by my dream of a girl, a career, and the father I never had. Life was great for me for a while. Kimberly and I worked together at Specialty Timbers. Business was good, and I learned a lot. My relationship with Ted was very good and continued to improve. Surprisingly, my relationship with my new brother-in-law Mike also improved. I learned that although he was a narcissistic and cocky little jerk at times, he was extremely loyal, and for some reason, he liked me. The first 2 years felt great, but cracks began to appear in the foundation. The first big crack was our nightlife. From once or twice a week for the first 2 years, by the beginning of the third year, it had become once or twice a month. Then Millie moved here. She was Kimberly's friend from Colorado. Her name was Minl Pham, but she was known as Millie. Thanks to Ted's connections, I bought the house I still live in for $1,225. The house needed a lot of work, and the bank wouldn't even give a loan on it. I bought it under contract from an old partner, Ted, and the actual payment was made through Specialty and deducted from my paycheck. Although confusing, Mike assured me that this was the best way to handle the deal. I brought the house into a livable condition, and Kim never complained. There was a small guest house in the backyard with running water and electricity. Millie moved there, she was an artist, and the house became her studio. Kim seemed to spend more time in the cabin than in the house. Millie was always nice to me, and there was no tension between us. 6 months later, one day with tears in her eyes, Kim came to me and said that she was in love with Millie. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. There was no swearing, no violence, no arguing. I saw black and cried. I cried for the first time in almost 20 years. The loss was intense and very sad. I realized that I had connected my relationship with Kim, my relationship with her family, and my work. My whole life was about to change. For 3 days, I sat at home and did nothing. Dark thoughts took over my mind. I was on the edge, and then Mike showed up. We spoke, and then he listened. He called, and within 30 minutes, Ted was with me. Ted assured me that no matter what happened, I would always have a job at Specialty. Mike told his dad I needed a week off, and Ted agreed. Mike took me on a trip where we talked, drank, I cried a little, and reflected. On the way back, I began to realize a few things. I was in terrible pain, but I had a job that I loved, a boss and ex-father-in-law whom I really liked and respected, and finally, a good and loyal friend in Mike. Even Kimberly and I found some comfortable camaraderie. The divorce was straightforward. She didn't want anything, and I kept the house. The most amazing thing was how sweet and supportive Millie was. There were some tough times, but I had a good support system of people who seemed to really care about me. I promised myself that before I got involved again, I'd get closer to a woman while protecting myself first. On the way back home, after I dropped off Celia, I tried to sort out my thoughts. The meeting with these guys didn't end with anything special. I felt a little devalued by them and a little devalued by Celia. On the other hand, this was only our second date. She has the right to have friends, but something about this meeting suggested there was a level of intimacy between her and these guys that didn't fit the image of Celia I had. Maybe I should back off a little. The next day was Sunday, and I needed to finish the fireplace and fix some rotten wood. After breakfast, I turned on podcasts and got lost in my work. It was satisfying to be able to renovate and restore the house to the way I envisioned it. Having my own home and knowing it would be as beautiful as I imagined made me especially happy. It was around noon before I checked my phone, and there were 2 messages, one from Mike, checking in, and one from Celia. Brandy and I are enjoying the weather and drinking coffee. Thanks for last night. I needed to think about that. Was I too sensitive, or should I trust my instincts? I needed more time to think. Later that afternoon, I sent back a neutral message saying, "Have a good time." That's all. On Monday evening, I received another message from her, "How's your day?" I waited a few hours and replied, "Okay." Yours? I received a long message in which she talked about work and a funny story about a dental patient. I didn't respond. Nothing on Tuesday night, and I was a little relieved. On Wednesday evening, she called. I was polite but not particularly enthusiastic. Finally, she asked what was wrong. I said nothing, and then she asked if I was upset with her. I said no, I was just busy. She invited me to dinner on Saturday night, and I accepted. Maybe I was too petty to be offended by that. I promised to put this behind me and see what happened next. Dinner on Saturday was pleasant. She was a good cook, and her apartment was cozy and beautifully furnished. I started to feel comfortable again and became optimistic. After dinner, we made love. We spent Sunday together, and the intimacy strengthened our relationship. We went for a run and then took a shower at my place. I showed her around my restoration project, and she seemed interested in all the work I was doing. I showed her the old mahogany wood hot tub I had purchased for a project we were supplying materials for and showed her where I was going to install it in the backyard. She was impressed with my carpentry skills and seemed to like my house. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other 2 or 3 times a week and talked or texted each other daily. In a weak moment, I agreed to go to Evolution with her on Friday night. I don't mind dancing a little, but I had the feeling this was not my scene. Celia was so excited that I couldn't help but be carried away by her enthusiasm. Evolution was a hip new club in the old city's warehouse district. I had heard about it but had never been there. I told myself that in a strong relationship, you have to make sacrifices sometimes, and I thought this would be one of them. We arrived a little before 9. Celia seemed to know a lot of the people there, staff and other patrons. The place was dark with twinkling lights and several DJs on elevated platforms. The dance floor was packed with people. Everyone was moving to the music, and it was hot inside. We found a seat, and Brandy and some guy walked up, hugging and laughing. It was difficult to talk due to the noise. Celia grabbed my hand, and we went out onto the dance floor. She was good, but I was clearly out of place. We soon found ourselves in the midst of a crowd. After a while, I wasn't sure if I was dancing with Celia or someone else. I looked at her and saw that she was having a great time. A little later, I shouted to her that I would go get a beer. She simply nodded and smiled. I waited a moment to see if she was coming with me, but she was engrossed in the dance. I stood at the table and occasionally saw glimpses of her. So far, I hadn't recognized any of the people we met in the city center a few weeks ago. She came back and drank, but I felt she wanted to keep dancing, so we went again. I was actually starting to have a good time until I recognized a couple of the guys we met downtown, especially Marcus. Marcus was a great dancer, and he maneuvered himself so that he could dance with Celia. I tried to get closer, but it didn't work. This went on for a while, and finally, I shouted in her ear that I would go get a drink. Did she want anything? She just nodded and continued dancing. I made my way to the bar and returned to our table. I checked my watch. It was a little after 11. I definitely wanted to get out of there, and I kept waiting for her to come back for a drink. Finally, she returned, laughing and smiling, with Marcus at her heels. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her drink, took a sip, and then Marcus grabbed it and drank it down. Celia simply laughed. "Let's go dance," she said, grabbing my hand. "No thanks, I think I'm done," I replied. "Come on, just once," she asked. Then Marcus intervened. "Come on, girl, I'll dance with you," and they left. I was angry, but it got worse. I was beside myself with rage. I looked at my watch. It was already after midnight. I decided to give her until 12:30 and then leave. I think it was 12:28 when she came back. I grabbed her, and we headed out. I was angry and tried to stay calm. I didn't want to scream and yell all the way to her place. She talked about what a great time she had, how wonderful the music was, and how much she liked to dance. The fact that I barely said a word didn't seem to register with her. When we got to her apartment, she realized where we were. "I thought we were staying with you today." "I'm tired," I said. "How about another time?" "Okay," she said with a forced smile and looked at me. I smiled, kissed her, and left. Without a doubt, this was not how our dates had ended in the past few weeks. The next day we didn't communicate. I struggled with my feelings. I really enjoyed taking care of her, but this scene and her enjoyment of it bothered me, and Marcus, they looked more than friends. I was busy both Saturday and Sunday, mostly trying to install a mahogany wood hot tub on the back deck. On Sunday evening, I saw that I had received a message from her. What happened? I didn't answer. On Monday evening, I received another message. Hey, you. I miss you. Call me. I realized that I had to respond, so I sent back a message. Sorry, a lot to do. Let's contact you tomorrow. Okay, she said. Tuesday night, I was still struggling with the situation and didn't respond. On Wednesday, I came home from work around 6 o'clock and her black Volkswagen was parked in front of my house. Time to face the music, I guess. I found her sitting on the back deck. What's happening? Are you breaking up with me? She asked, looking a little angry. Listen, I don't know what's going on. I'm struggling with some things right now. Which ones? She asked. I laid it all out. I talked about my marriage to Kim and the pain, then confessed my jealousy over her friendship with Marcus and my feelings of neglect at the nightclub. I laid out the whole truth. Why not? Maybe I'd never see her again. She sat looking at me, and then tears began to roll down her cheeks. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. If it means I keep you, I don't ever have to go to that place again. I want you, and I miss you, and I think maybe I'm falling in love with you. I was shocked. I thought it was the end for us, but we just turned in a different direction. She assured me again that she didn't need to hang out with that group or go to nightclubs. I asked her if she was sure, and she said, of course. If I had known this was bothering you, I would never have asked you to go. We celebrated that night in my bed. The next few months went great. We went on vacation to Hawaii for a week, my first time there, and we loved it. We hung out with my friends and a few of hers, but never with Marcus and that group. I never mentioned his name. We had been dating for about 8 months, and the holidays were approaching. She visited me almost every night, and we began to discuss life together. We spent the holidays with my family and the Robinsons. She got along well with everyone except Millie. For some reason, there was some tension between them. After the new year, business became more intense. We expanded into Northern California and the Puget Sound area, and thanks to the construction boom, our products were in great demand. Ted asked if we could meet on Thursday evening. Of course, I said. What happened? We'll talk on Thursday, was all he said. Thursday was busy, and I didn't realize it was later than 5 o'clock when we met at Ted's office. I felt some nervous tension due to the formality of this meeting. Ted explained that he was turning 60 this year and doing long-term planning. Instead of a bonus this year, I'm giving you 9% of specialty timbers. I was shocked. It wasn't what I expected. He continued, we opened up markets in Northern California and Western Washington, and that was successful, as you know. But now we're getting a lot of inquiries in Colorado and some of the Rocky Mountain resort areas. I want you to open these markets. It will mean some travel, maybe a week a month. Are you ready for that? Absolutely, I said. I hadn't seen much of the country. Traveling to these areas was exciting, and to be a co-owner was very exciting. I was so happy. He continued to explain that he now owns 51%, Mike and Kim each own 20%, and I have the remaining 9%. Kim was the CFO, but Mike handled the overall financial side of the business. I asked Ted if Mike and Kim were okay with me becoming a co-owner. It was their idea, he replied. One more thing on your plate, Smitty is going to retire at the end of the year. Millie's brother, John, will start working on the shop floor with Smitty. I want you to keep an eye on him as well. It will be done, I said. I couldn't wait to tell Celia that I was now a co-owner and that I was starting to travel. I was in seventh heaven. She was happy about the co-ownership part but was much less thrilled about my trips. How long will this be going on? She asked. I explained that it needed to slow down and that it was important for our financial future. There might be times when she could come with me. Okay, she said quietly. I quickly brushed off her comment, maybe too quickly. Our life continued, now with preparations for the wedding. We decided to do it in mid-February. She did most of the planning, and I supported her. Things were going well at work. The addition of the Rocky Mountain market increased demand, and we actually hired John's cousin, Nathan, and another friend of theirs, Van. Knowing that Smitty was leaving, I tried to spend time with John. I saw that he was smart, hardworking, and dedicated. One evening, he invited me to have a beer with him, Nathan, and another guy outside. They were all nice guys, seemed friendly, and were loyal to specialty. A lot of things were happening in our lives, and they all seemed like good things. I decided to hire a contractor to renovate my kitchen. This was a guy I knew who was buying from us. I could do it myself, but it would take months, and I didn't want to take too long to renovate an important part of the house. Celia participated in the design process, and although we did not agree on everything, her input was helpful. By the end of October, I had to go on a business trip again. Celia was unhappy with this and began to pressure me to shorten the trip to 2 or 3 days instead of 5, but this was impossible. My November trip coincided with the week Junior was scheduled to come to our city for a factory tour. I would have skipped it, but Ted said he would be happy to show Junior our plant. I had a trade show coming up with a client in Montana, and this would give me a good opportunity to showcase our products to that market. The exhibition began on Friday morning and continued until Saturday evening. I was planning to take an early flight out of Billings on Sunday morning. The show was busy on Friday. There was a cocktail party at 8 p.m., and I had a few promising conversations. Every night when I was on a business trip, I called Celia in the evening to check in. This Friday, I returned to my room a little before 10 p.m. and called. No one answered. Maybe she went to bed or was in the shower, I thought. I called again at 10:30, no answer again. I thought she had fallen asleep. The show started on Saturday at 10 a.m. I slept until 7 o'clock, got up, worked out in a tiny hotel gym, and called Celia around 8:15. Still no answer. After a quick shower, I saw that I had missed her call. I called her back. "Hey, we can't get in touch all the time. How are you?" I asked. "Okay," she said, seeming a little distracted, not with the enthusiasm I expected. "I called you a couple of times. Did you go to bed early?" "No, I turned off the sound on my phone. I was just doing some work in the kitchen," she replied. We started talking about renovating the kitchen, completely missing the fact that she hadn't answered her phone last night. Next week was Thanksgiving, and we would be celebrating with the Robinsons. She had been a little out of sorts all week, quiet, a little reserved, perhaps the holidays were stressing her out. I didn't say anything about her mood. I received an invitation from Longfellow's, our new client in Denver, to attend their Christmas party on December 9th. It was a Thursday evening. We talked about her going with me, but I had other things to do, and she had to work, so I went alone. They decorated their warehouse for the holidays. I knew there would be drinks there, so I called a taxi from my hotel. It was fun, and later that evening, I talked to Junior about our trip to Hawaii. I showed him some photos, and he saw one with Celia. "Let me see that again." "Is that your fiancée?" he asked. "Yes," I said proudly. He handed the phone back to me, then grabbed it again and looked attentively. He had a serious expression on his face. "What happened?" I asked. "Does she know someone named Brandy?" he asked. I looked at him and said, "Yes." "Why?" "I could be wrong, but I thought I saw her and some girl named Brandy at a dance club last month when I was in your town. I've got to tell you, as a friend, they weren't acting like they were engaged." This was while I was in Montana. I started to get angry and embarrassed. I asked him to tell me what he knew. Friday night after the factory tour, I went with another guy to some dance club called Dust. It was what you'd expect, loud, dark, etc. At one point, Sean, the guy I was with, was dancing with Brandy. He said he could take her back to the hotel if he wanted, but then later she and your girlfriend were with these other guys. I don't remember all their names, but they looked like trouble. "Do you remember someone named Marcus?" I asked. "Yeah, he was one of them. He was friendly with your woman," Junior said. "Listen, dude, you're a friend. I like you. As much as it hurts, I wish someone would have told me if this had happened to me." "I know," I said. "I appreciate it. I should probably go." Thanks for the party and the information. I received a big hug from Junior and left. I was fuming but needed to think about it. 1. She told me there would be no more nightclubs, which made me angry. 2. What about her relationship with Marcus? She had lied to me. I just didn't know how much. I barely slept that night, and my flight home was delayed. She sent me several messages, but I hadn't responded yet. Finally, as I was boarding my flight, she called, and I answered. "When are you coming back home?" she asked. "My flight is delayed, and I won't be home until 6 p.m., I replied. "Oh, too bad. I love you and miss you," she said. "I'll see you tonight," I said and hung up. After landing in on the way home, I decided my strategy would be to see if she would lie to me. I hugged and kissed her when I got home, then inspected the progress in the kitchen. "I have a question for you," I said. "Of course, honey." "What?" she asked. "When I was in Montana for the trade show last month, what were you doing on Friday night?" She looked away and said, "Nothing, just sitting at home." "You have one last chance to reconsider your answer." "Where have you been?" I asked, calmly but coldly. She burst into tears and ran into the bedroom. I sat and waited, angry and sad. I was just waiting. 2 hours later, she came out and told me this story. She had talked to Brandy the day before, and Brandy suggested they check out a new club called Dust. Brandy knew I was out of town and said all they were going to do was check it out. They ended up staying there late and dancing. "And then what?" I asked. "Then I went home alone," she said. "Alone?" I asked. "Was Brandy with you?" "No, she met an old boyfriend, I think," Celia replied. "So, you came home alone?" "Yes," she said. "Who was at the club?" I asked. "Someone I know, not really." "I don't know," she said. You can imagine how the conversation went from there. It was like pulling teeth to get accurate information from her. What I finally found out was that they went to a club, met some friends, and danced a little. Later, Marcus and his group came and hung out with them for a while. She claimed she left around midnight. "Have you ever had a night with Marcus?" I asked. "Absolutely not," she replied. "Does he want to have an intimate with you?" I asked. "No, well, maybe, probably, but he's just a friend." "You're the only one I want," she exclaimed. I told her that I needed to think about it and that it would be better for her to stay in the cabin. Sobbing, she grabbed her things and headed into the house. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were in the midst of wedding preparations, the holidays were just around the corner, and my entire future was in limbo. I needed some advice and called Mike. He suggested that we come to him on Friday evening. Meanwhile, this week with Celia had been very uncomfortable. She either cried or apologized. I was upset. I loved her, but at this stage, I didn't trust her. Can there be love without trust? I met up with Mike and Megan at their stylish new home in Southern Hills. I told them the whole story and asked what they thought. Mike was of the opinion that if you can't trust someone, you shouldn't marry them. It's hard to argue with that. Megan said, "I feel somewhat responsible for introducing you to. I don't know her very well, but I think she's a good person, not a bad person. And I also know that she's deeply in love with you." I agreed with Megan on this point. Ultimately, you either believe in them or you don't. That's something only you can decide, she said. That night, I returned home and asked Celia to come inside. We talked for a while, and I could tell she was nervous. I had a couple of questions for her and told her she needed to be completely honest. She agreed. I asked her if she felt like the whole club scene was important to her, what really happened the night she and Brandy went to Dust, and the true nature of her relationship with Marcus. She told me that no, clubs were not important, that Brandy had caught her in a weak moment, she was bored and lonely, and just wanted to have fun. Yes, Marcus was pursuing her, but she wasn't interested in him that way. Yes, she liked the attention of these guys, but she never did anything. I thought about it, and what she said sounded sincere and consistent with my impressions of her. I told her this was a good first step. She asked to stay in her bed that night, and I agreed. I didn't intend to have a night with her, but I couldn't resist. Through the holidays and the wedding, life went on. My radar was on, and I was watching closely. Nothing made me think anything was wrong. She was loving and affectionate. For my January trip, she took a week off and came with me, and we spent the weekend in snowy Boulder. We had a great time, and the dust incident was fading from memory. We got married in February, and it was a wonderful event. I met her mother and several members of her family. There were fewer than 100 people, including family, the Robinsons, and a few close friends. No one from her club crowd except Brandy attended. We honeymooned in St. Martin in the Caribbean. It was a little different from Hawaii. The ocean was warmer, there were fewer waves, and the water was a beautiful blue color. There was a strong European influence, especially on clothing-optional beaches. Without a doubt, this was my best vacation ever. For the next 2 years, things went pretty well. Sometimes I thought about that December and the fact that I almost called off the wedding and the marriage, and I was glad that I didn't. I blocked out any seeds of doubt and thought positively. We continued to work on the house, and it became a real pride of the area. I was pleased. Business continued to do well, and we even considered opening other markets, although we were at capacity with our current people and operations. I started a good friendship with John Pham. He was a great employee and a good guy. He knew our operations and equipment and was often the last one left in the workshop in the evenings. Every few weeks, John, Nathan, Van, and I would gather on the shop floor after work, smelling of cedar and sawdust, and drink 6 bottles of beer. Our conversations were casual, about business and life. I enjoyed their company, and I think they liked me too. Just when everything seemed stable, a new competitor from Asia began exporting to the United States. We first heard about them in Southern California, but knew they would soon be coming to our markets. It was an engineering product that looked similar to ours, but cost 30% less. We started to notice a decrease in sales. We had been on a steady upswing and had invested resources to meet demand, and now, for the first time since I had been here, sales were down. Ted, Kimberly, and I met to discuss strategy in the face of this new competition. Ted felt it would be best to meet with our customers and discuss the differences in the quality of our products. This would mean more travel, and I'm afraid, Cam, I'm going to have to ask you to cover our Northern California market as well as the mountain market. I knew Ted was right and that it was necessary, but I was stressed. That night when I got home, I told my wife about the business and what I had to do. "How long will this last?" she asked. "I don't know." "It will probably be months," I replied. "Months?" she exploded. "You're saying you'll be gone 2 weeks a month for months?" I told her yes, and that I couldn't make any promises. She was furious. Now, not only was I stressed about work, but I also had no support from my wife. We had good times, but over the next 6 months, our relationship deteriorated. The intimacy we had was rarely present. I felt like I was fighting on 2 fronts, in the market and at home. After 6 months of my traveling and her lack of understanding, our marriage was at its lowest point. I had to travel for business, which helped keep the business stable but required constant effort. She didn't understand. I left for the Bay Area on Monday and had a rough weekend, no intimacy, no good conversation, and no intim. I started to feel guilty about traveling and called her on Tuesday, suggesting we have a weekend party when I got back. She seemed a little more energetic, and I thought our relationship might improve. On Friday night, we called an Uber and went to Tomlinson Bistro in Old Town. She was affectionate, the conversation was good, and she even asked about business. We had a great dinner, a nice bottle of wine, and a couple of drinks afterward. I thought there would be intimate that night. I called an Uber, and we waited outside the restaurant. I went inside to use the restroom, and when I came back, I saw Marcus, Bobby, and that group surrounding Celia. She smiled and laughed, and Marcus put his arm around her waist. There was a confrontation, and Celia then came up to me, screaming and blaming me for the incident. They left when someone from the restaurant came out to check what was going on. At that moment, the Uber pulled up. We both got into the car. I was still stunned, and she started screaming at me. "Why did you have to ruin everything? What were you thinking?" she yelled. As I grabbed his hand, I said, "This is my body. What were you doing attacking my friends? I didn't say a word. I didn't trust myself. I was so angry at her and the whole situation, stress from work, stress from the marriage, and she showed much more loyalty to Marcus than to her husband. As soon as we entered the house, she went to the kitchen to get a bag of ice. She had no idea how angry I was. "Get away from me," I growled. This shocked her. She just stood there and looked at me. "Get back in the house." "What's your problem today?" she shouted back. "Today?" I roared. "My problem is you, every day. No support, no affection, just whining because I'm trying to make a living for us." She went to the bedroom, grabbed her things, and walked out the back door toward the house without saying a word. I definitely needed that space and was relieved when she left. I sat down at the table and drank brandy. With the second serving, I calmed down and began to think about my life. I loved my job, despite the challenges. It was my career. I cherished my relationship with the Robinsons. Ted was a mentor and friend. Kim and I were always friends despite our failed marriage, and Mike was my best friend. I loved my home. I had gradually turned it into an ideal space for myself. Perhaps because my family had housing insecurity while I was growing up, owning my own home was especially important to me. I started to feel better and decided that tomorrow Celia and I would talk and maybe even consider counseling. I gave her some time. At 9 a.m., I went out to the house with a tray of coffee, juice, and fruit. I opened the door and found no one. Her things weren't here, and she obviously hadn't spent the night. Okay, what now? I spent about an hour doing chores in the backyard and called her. It went straight to voicemail. I called again in the middle of the day, and again it went to voicemail. I continued with housework and tried calling several times before contacting Kimberly. She invited me to dinner, and Millie and I discussed my situation. Kim said we had both made mistakes, but Millie was firmly on my side. We discussed all options, including divorce. I was in town this week, and after a half-dozen unanswered calls, by next Tuesday, the ball was in her court. On Friday afternoon, she called. She was staying with friends and wanted to come and pick up some of her things. She arrived around 6 p.m. I wanted to talk, but she said she wasn't ready yet. I asked who she was staying with, and she said just friends. I told her I was leaving next week for an exhibition and would like to talk when I returned. She nodded in agreement. She left in a car that I didn't recognize, with dark-tinted windows, so I couldn't tell who was driving. I decided to fly out Sunday night to Denver so I could start work Monday morning. My sales strategy for clients was about quality service and the relationships we established, compared to the lower prices that were my Asian competitors' only value proposition. We managed to maintain a good percentage of our business, especially as customers started noticing material defects in the Asian shipments. On Tuesday night, I had dinner with Junior Longfellow. We were close enough that I told him the whole story about my situation. "You know," he said, "we don't necessarily need you at the show this weekend. We co-sponsored a booth with Longfellow at the show, and it's going to be slow. To be honest, I have too many people scheduled there. I think you need to go back and sort things out at home." My first reaction was to protest, but I decided to take him up on his offer. I took an early flight on Friday morning that got me home before 9 a.m. The rest of the week in Colorado went well, and I felt optimistic, even though I knew Celia and I had a lot of work to do. I drove straight home from the airport, and when I opened the door, I immediately felt that something was wrong. The house was in disarray. It looked like there had been a party. There were empty alcohol bottles, garbage, and unwashed dishes everywhere. There was a burn mark on my refinished wood floors and a large dark stain on the couch. I checked everything. No one was in the house, but it seemed like someone had been sleeping in the guest room. Celia, would she do that? I thought. She loved the house as much as I did. I went out into the backyard, and everything looked fine, but I noticed some cigarette butts on the ground. I walked to the cabin and opened the door to find Celia and Marcus sleeping on the bed. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. She jumped up. "You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow," she said. Meanwhile, Marcus calmly rolled over and grinned at me. "Get out of here, you an idiot." I roared at him. "Calm down, dude. I'm leaving. But you realize that this woman owns half of this house, he said. You have 2 minutes to get out of here. I shouted. We're married, and this is my home too. This is my home too, she added. I was furious and knew that if I didn't leave, something very bad would happen. 2 minutes, I said, and left. At the main house, I called Mike and explained what had happened. He was calm and said he would make a few calls to divorce lawyers and set up an appointment. Divorce at this stage seemed like the only option. I called Kimberly at work, gave her the short version, and she said she and Millie would come see me that evening. I ordered new locks from a hardware store. I was so stressed and started cleaning up the mess in the house. Mike called back and said he had an appointment for Monday at 11 a.m. with the divorce lawyer he had recommended. His name was Darren King. I checked his profile, former military lawyer, originally from Texas. I found a photo of him, dark hair, strong jaw, and a very determined look. Great. I checked the house, they were gone. It was still a mess, and there seemed to be signs of illicit substance use. I received the locks and installed them. By then, it was already dinner time when Kim and Millie arrived. They listened to the whole story, and even Kim agreed that it was impossible to save the relationship. I was more angry than sad at that moment. I met Darren King, and he was exactly as he appeared, firm handshake, direct gaze. He explained that even despite Celia's infidelity, it would not be taken into account in the divorce. He asked about my assets, and I told him about the house, my bank and retirement accounts, and my 9% stake in Specialty Timbers. He said the assets would likely be split 50-50 and that I should be prepared for that outcome. He told me he would prepare the documents, and that I could give them to her by the end of the week. After the meeting, I was shocked. My marriage was over. She would get half the value of the house and half of my equity in Specialty Timbers. The entire stability of my life was at risk. I started to get depressed. I called Mike to explain what was going on. After explaining what Darren King had said about the 50-50 split, Mike said, "Don't worry about it now, just look after yourself. I may be able to help." I felt a little better after talking to Mike, but what could Mike do? The law is the law. I went to work mainly because I didn't want to be alone and was trying to escape into the familiar routine of running a business. It seemed like Ted and Kim had already talked to Mike. They were both supportive and encouraged me about the possible outcome. I wasn't so optimistic. Even John, Nathan, and the warehouse guys were supportive. John came up to me and said, "Boss, we are with you. Don't worry." I truly valued their friendship. I sent her the divorce papers on Friday. I immediately received a message from her, "Man, you should have sent them to my work. I want half of everything." I called Mike, who suggested calling Darren. Darren said to stop all communication with her. If she hired a lawyer, I should contact Darren, and then everything would be resolved between the lawyers. I couldn't help but worry about my house and my share of Specialty Timbers. I was upset and called Mike about it. He said, "I know what you're going through, but I'm working on a few things for you." Have I ever let you down? He hadn't let me down, but I asked him, "What exactly are you working on?" "I can't say yet." "Trust me," he replied. A few weeks passed, and one night, John, Nathan, Van, and I went for a beer in Old Town. As we sat inside this bar, a couple of guys from Marcus's group walked by and glanced at me, then quickly left. I looked at John, and he was just watching them. "Are those the idiots?" I asked. "Yes," John answered. All three began speaking Vietnamese. "Don't worry, boss. We've got your back," John said. The next day, Darren called me and said we had a preliminary settlement meeting for the following Wednesday at his office. "What do I need to do? How can I help?" I asked. "Just be here at 3 o'clock, he said. I called Mike and told him what was going on. "Yeah, I know. We'll be there too." "We?" I asked. "Like I said, trust me. This could end well for all of us," he said and hung up. I was puzzled but slightly hopeful. I arrived early on Wednesday, and Darren's secretary took me to the back office. A few minutes later, I was led into a conference room. On our side of the table were Darren, Mike, a man I didn't know, and myself. On the other side was Celia's lawyer, Rick Blassingame. Celia looked good, and to my disbelief, Marcus was sitting there, grinning. There were no handshakes or small talk. Darren began, "Okay, Mr. Blassingame, this is your meeting. Proceed." "If I may," Blassingame began, "Mrs. Joseph simply wants to get what is rightfully due to her after your client kicked her out of their matrimonial home." "Go on," Darren said, looking straight at him. "Here is a fair and accurate accounting of the marital assets," Blassingame said, handing us all the documents. The following was written there. 1. 9% of Specialty Timbers LLC, valued at $1,360,000. 2. 50% of the residence at 12 Ravens Crest, valued at $1,325,000. 3. Mr. Joseph's 50% retirement account, valued at $163,000. 4. 50% of their joint checking and savings accounts, valued at $119,000. 5. Various pieces of furniture and other household items. At that moment, a man I did not know opened his briefcase and took out documents. "Mr. Blassingame, let me introduce myself to you and your client. My name is Aaron Devier. I am a lawyer and doctor of laws in the field of corporate law. I have several documents that you may be interested in," he said, handing the documents to Celia and Blassingame. 1. Aaron said, "Mr. Joseph does not own the house on Ravens Crest. It is an asset owned by Specialty Timbers LLC." Blassingame faltered. "He is a co-owner of the company." "No," Aaron interrupted. "Under corporate bylaws, a majority can appoint an owner, and in exceptional cases where doing so would be detrimental to the company, a majority can cancel shares. If you look at page 3 of the annual report, you'll see that most of the owners canceled Mr. Joseph's shares before the divorce suit was filed." At this point, Marcus shouted, "This is crap. Half of it is yours." Celia cried, and Blassingame was clearly out of his element. "Whoever you are," Blassingame said, Darren King shot him a cold look. "One more word and you'll be removed." "In fact, I'll do it myself," Darren said. At that moment, Marcus ran out of the room, slamming the door. Celia continued to cry, and the room fell silent. "Mr. Blassingame," Darren said, "Mr. Devier has reviewed all the documents and certified them with the Oregon Attorney General's office. You can try to challenge this in a higher court, but I advise you it will be expensive for your client. I will add that Mr. Devier has advised on corporate law issues far more complex than this. He also, as a favor to his fraternity brother Michael Robinson, advises Mr. Joseph pro bono." I was as shocked as Celia and Blassingame. Darren opened the folder and took out a receipt. "Here's a cashier's check for $125,000, Mr. Blassingame. This is our last offer. Do you need a few minutes to consult with your client?" "Yes, I need it," said Blassingame. We left and went to Darren's office. I hugged Mike, I hugged Darren, and when I went to hug Aaron Devier, he extended his hand and said, "A handshake is enough." I laughed and shook his hand. "Thank you, all of you," I said. "But I don't own my house." Mike smiled and said, "Don't worry, the house is yours." When my old man made a deal with Terry Peterson to buy the house, Peterson didn't want to sell it to you because he was afraid you couldn't pay it off. So the old man paid for it, and you paid him. Aaron looked into the deal, and now this house belongs to Specialty Timbers. As soon as everything works out, we will legally register it in your name. What about my shares in the company?" I asked. "Do I still own 9%? "No, you don't actually own any after everything is settled and over," Aaron said. "You will own 14%. I'm giving you 5% of my share. Honestly speaking, Cam, you deserve it. The company is doing well, and you have a lot to do with it." At that moment, Darren's secretary came in and said that Blassingame was ready to talk back in the conference room. We all took our seats. Darren began, "Okay, Mr. Blassingame, what did you and your client decide?" "Well, Mr. King, it's not that simple. Although he doesn't own the house, Mrs. Joseph spent many hours repairing and maintaining it. Also, when Mr. Joseph was on his many trips, Mrs. Joseph took care of the house," Blassingame said. We believe that $150,000 would be a much fairer amount that Mrs. Joseph at a minimum deserves, Darren said. At this, Darren closed the folder, put it back in his briefcase, stood up, and said, "See you in court." With that, Mike and Aaron Devier stood up too. Wait. We agree on $125,000, muttered Blassingame. Darren pulled out the divorce deed, and we signed the agreement. I was free with minimal expenses. When Celia and Blassingame came out, Mike said loudly enough for everyone to hear, $25,000 is a great result. We would have gone to $75,000. I only heard one SOB from Celia, and that was it. It was a little rough, Robbie, Aaron said. Mike responded, "Not rough enough, my friend." We celebrated at the bar, and I happily paid. I was so grateful for the legal help and especially grateful to have Mike Robinson as my friend. Friday was a long day at work but a good day. Business was going well, and I felt very grateful for all the support I received from Ted, Kim, Mike, John, and the guys at the warehouse. I felt like I was part of a great team. I was still angry at Celia, but most of all, I was filled with sadness about our relationship. If just a few things had gone differently, I think we could have been happy. But I also thought, should a strong bond be so fragile? Hard to say. I didn't know. But as I was leaving work, a dark car with tinted windows started following me. I was calm, just glad to go home. I went straight to the back deck for my after-work beer. I sat down, closed my eyes, and just exhaled. That's when I first heard them. There are 3 of them. Well, look who we have here. What do you need, Marcus? I said, scared. What I need is you, Marcus replied. I looked around for a way to escape. This will be fun, he chuckled. At that moment, I heard a noise from the direction of the house, and a few seconds later, John, Nathan, Van, and 3 of their friends appeared in my yard. Do you need help, boss? John asked. Actually, John, I need some help. Can you show these guys the way out? I asked. Marcus began to retreat, and his boys ran away. John's guys grabbed them, and John grabbed Marcus. We'll talk, mister, he told Marcus, leading them outside the yard. An hour later, John returned alone. I thanked him and asked how he knew they were there. I saw a black car following you from the warehouse. I've seen these guys before, the bad guys, John said. Well, thank you. How can I thank you? I asked. Give thanks. You don't know anything, John said. We are friends. It's my guarantee that these guys won't come back. I didn't want to know. Flashback, 5 years later, business has its ups and downs, but for us, it's mostly UPS. I have a new employee, and although he didn't know the lumber business, he was smart, hardworking, and a good student. I worked with him in the operations department with John and the guys. His name is Chase Devier, yes, the cousin of Mike's fraternity brother Aaron, who helped me so much all those years ago. Chase seemed uninterested in college and needed a job. At first, I thought I was just returning the favor, but it has worked out well for us. Ted still comes by every day, but I think he mostly reads the newspapers and talks to old friends. Kimberly really runs things, and I help her. I spend a lot of time traveling, but now that we're established, it's not as often as before. My personal life has also improved through my friendships with John and Nathan. I met Van's sister, Jelly, yes, that's her name. I asked her why she was called that, and she said, when my mother gave birth to me, she said, it's Jelly, so cute. And she's really cute. She's a fitness instructor at Valley Club and is in great shape. I'm almost 10 years older than her, but she doesn't seem to mind. She also doesn't seem to mind that I'm in no rush to get married again. She tells me, if you're looking at another woman, I'll kick her 5th place and then yours. I just smile and laugh. Have I met Celia again or seen her in a bad state? No, never. And to be honest, I rarely even think about her. I saw Marcus once when he was walking down the street towards me. He saw me and crossed to the other side. I am forever grateful to the people in my life, Ted, Kim, Millie, John, Nathan, Van, of course, Jelly, but most of all, Mike. I love my home and my company. I'm a very happy person. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that the husband was lucky to find out about his wife's infidelity, because if he hadn't come home early he wouldn't have noticed anything. What's your impression? Write in the comments. Until new videos.